G'day there everybody in Wedderburn. Graham Anderson here with the climate update for Wedderburn. So what is it that we're planning for? I guess we don't have any control over weather patterns but we can be better informed, and this is what we'll give an update today on seasonal forecasts and what our weather patterns are up to. There is a lot we do have under our control, and that's are all around farm management, seasonal risks, the tactics, tools, and strategies that are under your control, so that we're better set up next time we run into dry territory. Now, a bit of an update here. Just this is May rainfall. This is a decile map, and basically decile looks at the rainfall we've just had in May and compares it to the long-term record. And so you can see these sort of wider colours here are where it's been average rainfall for May, and this is decile 1 is where it was within the driest 10% of years, and then decile 10 it's where it's been in the wettest 10% of years. So you can see there's been a lot of extra moisture around in May and also in June, and these sort of dry areas here got that big rain in that first week in June with that east coast slow. When we look at autumn, March, so this is 3 months, March to May this year, can sort of see that most of Victoria is travelling pretty well. Bit of a relief from last year, so average, and West Australia off to a great start, but still, plenty of moisture around this year. Looking at rainfall for last year, 2015, for the whole 12 months, you can see that your part of the world was in the sort of decile 1, driest 10% of years or more. There are others around that got some good rains, but we missed out. And when we look at the last 2 years, so 2014 and 2015, we can sort of see here for a lot of Victoria was the driest 10% of years, or there's this new colour here, which is really parts of central and western Victoria were the driest 2 year period on record. So it's been a bit of a tough run. And we don't have to go back too far to remember it was very wet. This is 2010 and 11. Those 2 years the Bureau of Meteorology has down as Australia's wettest 2 years on record, and just pipped 1974 and 75. And you can see a lot of moisture, not just here, but all over the whole of the country. And we'll talk about where did all of that moisture come from. And I guess the broader story really and largely feeds into our water resources, that this cool season rainfall, so this is April to October, when the Bureau looks at that since 1997 for that last 18 years and compares that to the longer term record, we've had the sort of driest run of cool seasons in that longer term record. And it's not just here in Vic, but also in parts of WA. So I'll talk why that might be happening. And looking at runoff around the place, this is just a couple of inflows I thought I'd show since 1950. This is looking at the Cresu Creek up in the top of the catchments up around Clunes, but you can certainly see there since the end of the 90s, runoff's been a lot lower than what I guess we had up until that point. And even when we look at other places like Joyce's Creek at Strathleigh or Bet Creek at Norwood, it's that same pattern. Basically since the end of the 90s, runoff's been pretty poor. And this is often a traditional rainfall runoff period, is this sort of winter, June to October, and this is from the Avoca River at Canoa Bridge. And again, you can see lots of variability there. That's the long-term average of inflows through the river there, but it really fell off a cliff again since the end of the 90s, and we'll talk about why. And it still will flow, but this the flow we had in 10-11, most of that was sort of in the summer months. So here's the long-term rainfall record for Wedderburn. It goes back all the way to 1883. So you can see this year here is 1883, and that's the long-term record right up to last year. Now this line through here is basically the long-term average, which is 468 millimetres, and some years you can see are up to 700 or even 800 millimetres. These really wet years, and then some years are as low as 200 and 300 millimetres. You can see those sort of drought years there. There's the 82 drought. Now, as you can see, a lot of variability there. You can see some sort of drier runs. That's the Federation drought there, World War II drought. And again, these last 20 years, there hasn't been too many years that have been above the line, and we've got 10 and 11 there. So we brought a story about, well, what's going on here? Is there anything that's a bit different to that longer term record? And here's Wedderburn's rainfall just split into the autumn, winter, spring and summer, the seasons. And I guess one of the things to notice is that the lack of wet autumns, and this is happening in a lot of places across southeast Australia, so that wetting up the catchments for runoff, if that doesn't happen, makes it a bit harder to get runoff. Probably haven't had as many wet winters as we might have in the long record. Spring seems as variable as ever. We've just had a run of the last few springs have all been a bit drier. And summer, pretty variable, but you can see that 2010-11 summer was pretty extraordinary, your wettest summer on record. So we got quite a bit of runoff in that year across Victoria, but it's not typically when we expect our runoff. So we'll certainly take it when we can get it, but what's missing is some of that cooler season stuff. And why? I guess this is probably the explanation of what's going on. We can see to make rainfall down here in this part of Australia, we need two things. And the wetter years are where we always get a good source of moisture from the warm tropical oceans. We've got the El Nino Southern Oscillation, so it's always a good supply of warm tropical moisture. And when that feeds into these weather systems down here and that moisture hits the cold air, that's when we get rain. Now, some years we get more moisture directed from this, and this is La Nina years, we get more moisture, and that tends to flow into our wetter years. And the same over here, the Indian Ocean Dipole can be in a helpful mood where some years it's helping direct more moisture down our way, and that correlates with our wetter years. You can see in the Southern Ocean, all of these cold fronts there, they're basically driven by these really strong winds in the Southern Ocean called the Southern Annular Mode, and it's a conveyor belt that flicks all those cold fronts across southern Australia. And basically what's been happening since 97, I guess the Southern Annular Mode has probably just shifted. Those winds have gone further south, so the fronts have been a bit weaker since then. And one thing we'll just talk about, one of the seasonal forecasters look at this a lot, it's sea surface temperature maps. This is back to 2006. So this is what a dry pattern looks like. And you can see along the equator here, the water's really warm. Down here, it's really cold. But this is an anomaly, a temperature anomaly map. So it's showing this area of ocean where it's these colours is an area that might be 1 or 2 degrees warmer than average. So here, that's a typical El Nino, warmer over there. And bluer colours is where ocean might be cooler than its long-term average. In an El Nino, and we had a similar thing last year, it's warmer over here, lots of extra cloud, rains, floods is happening over that way. And when we've got cooler water to our north, basically it means that the weather patterns down here, these cooler oceans aren't generating as much moisture as what it is over here. So they're sort of a drier pattern, and that's the sort of similar to what we had last year. And one of the things, it's a useful tool each year to see how might the spring shape up, depends on what this ocean's up to. Just have a look at this particular area to the north of Australia, and we'll compare what it looked like in the wetter spring of 2010. So there you can see the bit of a difference. In 2010 October we had the La Nina in the Pacific, and all the warm oceans were over in our part of the world, and that extra warmth was generating lots of extra moisture, plenty of moisture to feed into our weather making. And that's a lot about the preconditions for seasonal forecasts, is that if there's plenty of moisture happening up here, that's in our favour. It's then up to the individual weather events to decide, well, whose farm does it all get to fall on. And looking at Wedderburn, when we go back through the previous 31 El Nino years, and this is just looking at sort of August to October rainfall at Wedderburn, in the longer term, a third of years should be decile 1 to 3, a third of years should be decile 8, 9, 10, and a third are in between in the average. But when we look at just those El Nino years, you can see it's Eastern Australia that's drier, while at Wedderburn, it doubles the chance of a drier spring. So you can see that 2 out of 3 of those springs were decile 1 to 3. You can still get the odd wet one, but certainly does increase the chance when there's less moisture coming out of the Pacific. When the La Nina's on and there's a bit of extra moisture coming out of the Pacific, and we look at what's happened at Wedderburn, slightly increased chance of wetter or average, and reduced chance of dry years whenever we've had those previous La Nina events. And the Indian Ocean Dipole effect at Wedderburn, when it's in its drier phase up here, it's got a bit of an influence on Victoria. And again, you can see whenever those years it's been drier, or its drier phase, you can see the fingerprints over increasing the chance of dry years. But interestingly, especially for this year, when the Indian Ocean Dipole is in its wetter phase, and that's called IOD negative, it's helping set up for wetter years. And whenever that's happened in the past, actually, over 2/3, almost 3/4 of those years at Wedderburn in August to October were wet, decile 8, 9, 10. Really reduces the chances of dry. So that's one to watch for this year, because I guess the ocean's sort of looking like it'll head in that direction this year. And so if you're interested in staying tuned on what those climate drivers are doing, we've got the Break newsletter, which is available as an email, and also there's a YouTube update which provides the latest on what's going on, and I'll give you the details for subscribing to that in a tick. There's also soil moisture probe information too from Dale Boyd. One of the things in the fast break is this table, and basically Dale Grove puts this together. There's 11 different global forecast models here from across the world. So the European model, the Bureau's model, Australia, Japanese, US, NASA. So they're all really looking at longer term forecasts for the next 3 and 6 months, and Dale looks at them just to see what are they predicting for Victoria. So here's the runs for the end of May, for June, July, August, and what they're thinking for the Pacific Ocean, La Ninas, what they're thinking about the Indian Ocean Dipole, and importantly, what are they thinking about rainfall. And we can see here, of the 11 models, currently 7 of them have got a bit of a slightly wetter signal they're picking up. This time last year probably was the opposite, where more than half of them were picking up a dry signal because of last year's El Nino. When we're looking at September, October, November for this year, currently quite a few of the models are thinking the Indian Ocean Dipole will head into its wetter phase, and when you look there, all bar one are sort of thinking about slightly wetter. So we might see a bit of runoff later this year, which would be a good thing. So one thing people ask is, we had the big El Nino last year. What's happened at Wedderburn after the previous El Nino events? And basically here, if you look on the left here, these are the different El Nino years in history, and the red or yellow is just about whether they were dry years. Yellow was average and blue was wetter years. So not too many wet ones, a lot of red there. But these are the years immediately following. So these were the years after El Ninos and what happened at Wedderburn. And you can see when you look at the April-October rainfall, these are all just the monthly rainfall for each of those years. But you can see more of them are in the blue, which is the wetter end of the spectrum. There was a few dry ones, but a lot more chance of average or wetter. And when you look at these years that were usually wetter, you can see that they were often an Indian Ocean Dipole when it's in its negative phase, or what's called the wetter phase. So that's probably something to keep an eye on for this year. But at least it's a bit of a, usually coming out of El Ninos, doesn't guarantee average or wetter, but it's certainly better odds than this time last year. Now what we've been over really is about good old-fashioned variability, so we'll just talk about what's happening now that might be different to previously. And one thing that is a bit different is this is the temperature record for the last 100 years from across Australia. You can see it goes up and down. Usually El Nino years are warmer, La Nina years are cooler, but since the 50s each decade's been getting a bit warmer. Still quite a bit of variability there, and but that's largely a bit different today. And when we look at Victoria's temperatures, you can see here for summer, autumn, winter and spring, a lot of variability from year to year, but basically the last sort of 10-15 years been quite a bit warmer in most of those. And milder winter's been good for pasture growth and things, but if you have a look at spring, of the last 10 springs, probably 7 of them have been between 1 to even 3 degrees warmer than long-term average. So that's almost a month out of whack. And so I guess one of the broader things in here from a water point of view, it means that our plants and water use is more perhaps than what it might have been once. And basically the Bureau say we're going through a process where we're squeezing in an extra month of summer in our system. And one of the things that's also been happening, this is showing the pressure pattern since 1950, and basically we're in a part of the world where as things have been getting warmer, the pressure pattern's just been getting a little bit stronger. And you can see here again, this is for the southern Australian region, but looking at pressure in our growing season, April to October, from 1950 all the way through to last year, you can see the pressure goes up and down. Usually El Nino years we have a higher pressure over Australia, and La Nina years are lower. But you can see certainly since 97 that pressure sort of has spiked up a bit more, and we haven't returned to that. So that's part of that broader climate change signal, which most of the climate scientists expect to continue, that as the world gets warmer, that pressure pattern just nudges up a bit. And we'll still get wet years thrown in there, but we're just tipping the odds into having a little bit drier a bit more often. And some work just recently done by AGIC was looking really at the seasonality of Australia's rainfall, and we've got areas that are summer dominant or uniform throughout the year, or winter dominant. And it was just basically looking at our rainfall pattern since 2000 to see if it was any different to that 100-year record. And basically these arrows show that the movement of these zones since 2000, so we can sort of see that winter dominant rainfall zone has shifted quite a way south, and largely it's as they expect. As the world gets warmer, the most of our weather patterns migrate a bit towards the poles, so that's probably a pattern that will continue. So even though the weather throws us curveballs, it's really good to see all of the things that agriculture is doing. Even despite our tough run of years, Victorian food and fibre exports is growing, industries are growing. It's a great effort to farmers. And all of these things that have been happening, we've got modern technologies, equipment, better genetics, better systems to handle this than ever before. We've got improved farm and regional infrastructure, and it's specifically to do with whether it's fodder storage or water storage or communications. These are really important things, and I guess the focus of your discussion today. We've got the growth in local and export markets, and certainly as that gets better, that's really important because it underpins how much money we've got to spend on these sort of improvements that we do on farm. Business management for variable years and incomes is a really critical part of this, how we manage the boom and bust cycle. That's really becoming more and more important as well. We've seen a huge amount of work done on farm plans, minimum tillage, soils and pasture cover. That's been terrific, so that we're handling these dry periods better than before, and a lot of really good technology. So I guess they're all things we've got in the battle to better manage whatever the weather throws at us. And I guess this is just an observation about, for all of the change that happens in agriculture, I think there's sort of three levels of decisions. There's those first decisions which we tend to do on the run. We get through from one year to the next and doing a lot of that. But then there comes a time when sometimes you're going to make some bigger decisions, and in this case we might be talking about feedstock or grazing or water systems. And that some of these changes cost a bit more, but if you plan them well, they can set you up so that you're better for the next time a dry season hits. And then there's always tougher decisions which usually costs more, or they've got a lot more thinking to be done about them. But I guess when I just reflect about all of the changes agriculture and farmers have been making, those are probably the changes that have always been there for agriculture and dealing with change. And I guess one of the things is making sure you're grabbing hold of your farm's future, grab it by the steering wheel, and start looking at some of those bigger decisions that help make you better off in future. So I hope that's of use. If you want to get the break, just drop an email to the break at ecodev.vic.gov.au and we'll add you to the list and you'll get that monthly update. All the best with your water planning.